She asked if she disgusted him. Winter waited. He gave her his coat and a house rule. Eat first, talk later, but the snow carried a notched heel and an old war's X. This won't be a shootout. It's a reckoning, quiet as a stove, steady as a crib built to last. Snow had hard edges that morning. It rasped the cottonwood bark and whispered along the wire like a saw. Silas Boone reined up where the fence made a corner and the river bent under a lid of ice. His mare blew steam, ears pricked to the tree, with its limbs loaded down white. Something moved under there, not coyote, not deer. She was crouched in the drift like a burned-out coal, near naked, one arm across her chest, the other pulling a scanty flap of husk to her hips. Dust and blood had frozen in little reddish beads along her ribs. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Her skin had that wind-scoured look, raw and shiny. Her eyes were too big for her face. "Do I disgust you?" she asked. The voice came brittle, the way ice sounds before it goes. Silas didn't answer. He just let his breath go slow and felt the old pulls in his side where the weather got into him every winter. The mare shifted. He laid a hand on her neck to steady her and himself. He swung down. Snow came over the tops of his boots and packed at his ankles. Cold chewing through the leather, he unbuttoned his wool coat, good heavy cloth, greasy with tallow and horse, and slid his arms out one at a time. Steam rose off the lining. The wind tried to snatch it. He didn't let it. He held the coat out, not touching her. "Here," he said. She watched his hands before she looked at his face. A long time passed in 3 heartbeats. Then she lifted her chin a fraction and reached. Her fingers were blue-white. She dragged the coat around herself like she meant to disappear in it. The collar swallowed her neck. The hem fell to her shins, stiff with cold, then softened as her heat found the wool. "Do I?" She couldn't finish it this time. "No." He said it like a man states weather. Nothing to argue. Her lips were split. One corner had bled and crusted. He unstoppered the canteen and set it on the snow between them. Small sips. She nodded, eyes on the tin, and drank the way the thirsty learn to, slow, careful, ready to stop if pain starts. Water ran down her chin and into the wool. The coat took it in. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried. The first push failed. On the second, she came up halfway, swayed, and steadied with a hand against the cottonwood. He stepped back to give her sky and room. Folks did better when you didn't crowd them. Old Hank at the relay used to say, "Give a spooked thing a gate, son. It'll walk through on its own." Silas believed that. "What's your name?" he asked. A beat of wind rattled the fence. "Lila," she said, soft. Then, after a moment, "Lila June." "All right, Miss June." He took the mare's lead. "There's a roof a mile on, beans, stove, dry socks." He tipped his head toward the draw where the willows made a line out of the snow. "You can follow or you can wait. I'll leave the door unlatched." He turned and started. No hurry. The kind of pace that keeps heat without burning it off. He didn't check over his shoulder for 20 steps. When he did, she was moving, one foot careful in the other's print. The coat flapped at her calves. The wind pulled her hair across her face, and she let it, saving her hands to balance. They crossed the creek, where the ice thickened against the stones, and sang. The mare took it like she'd done it 100 times. Lila watched the hooves choose their places. Once she slipped and gave a small sound in her throat. Silas stopped, waited, said nothing. She found her feet again. The cabin swept back of a rise, half hid by sage capped with snow. A stovepipe made a weak little thread of smoke against the pale. He lifted the latch, pushed the door, and stepped in first to throw up the damper and rake coals from the belly of the stove. The iron ticked as it woke. He motioned to the chair nearest the heat. She eased down slow, like sitting hurt. The room held the plain smells of a winter ranch, old coffee, sheep tallow, leather, wood smoke, a hint of horse. He set beans to warm, poured water in a tin cup, and let it sit on the back of the stove until it steamed without boiling. He laid a folded pair of wool socks on the hearthstone, turned so the toes faced her. "House rules," he said. "Eat first. Talk later. Nobody lays a hand on nobody without asking." Her eyes lifted. Some of the wild in them backed off a step. She gathered the coat tighter as if the words were part of it. Snow hissed off the skirt onto the hearth and went to nothing. Outside, the wind had started a new song along the wire. Inside, the stove found its voice and breathed. Silas listened to both, then to the small sound of Lila June swallowing warm water, one careful sip at a time. He set the beans nearer the heat and, without looking, slid a second chair within reach of the stove, its legs scraping a low, steady promise across the plank floor. The stove put a low red in the iron, and the room changed shape around its heat. Frost lifted off the window, a finger at a time. Lila June's breath quit smoking in the air and settled back inside her where it belonged. She held the tin cup in both hands like prayer. Silas Boone moved the way men do when they've repeated the same motions every winter they can remember. He shook beans into a skillet, tipped in a spoon of tallow, pinched salt. The wooden spoon clicked the pan steady as a clock. He set a heel of sourdough by the lid to soften. When the steam rose, it smelled like somebody had survived longer than they planned to. "Try them socks," he said, without looking up. She studied the socks like they might bite. Then, bending slow, she let the coat gap just enough to work a foot free of the drift-stiff cloth she'd wrapped there. Her toes were white as candle wax, the nails bruised blue. She didn't complain when the wool dragged over cracked skin. A hiss through the teeth was the whole of it. The second sock came on easier, color pushed back into her feet, stubborn as sage. He set the plate on the table and stepped away from it, giving her room between him and the food. She rose and moved in a small circle like a skittish colt, keeping the chair, the stove, and Silas all arranged where her eyes could count them. Then she sat. The spoon was light, the beans heavy. She ate like a person who remembered manners under the hunger. "Coffee?" he asked. She nodded. "Please." He poured and cut it with a slosh of hot water so it wouldn't jump her heart wrong. When she lifted the cup, her hand shook less than out at the cottonwood. The coat had taken her shape some. It hung different now, less like a borrowed sail, more like a thing that might stay. They ate quiet. The only sounds were stove breath, spoon click, the wind combing wire into song. After a while, Silas said, "The law in this house is simple." Her eyes met his and held, ready. "Eat first," he said. "Talk later. Fire stays high when there's folks in the room. Doors don't lock, but they latch. If you need out, you lift and go. If you need in, you knock and say your name." She swallowed. "And, touching? Nobody lays a hand on nobody without asking," he said. "If asking's too hard, you don't need to be doing it." Something in her shoulders unstrung at that. She breathed all the way down for the first time and let it out slow. When she spoke, her voice had lost a little of the crackle. "That's fair." He nodded. "Fair'll do." A minute later, she pushed the plate back a finger's width. "You want the rest?" He shook his head. She gathered courage like kindling. "Then I'll save it." "Top shelf," he said. "Mice won't climb past sage." She stood and reached, the coat swinging. Her skin was a map of winter the world had written without permission. Scrapes, fingertip bruises, a long bite mark gone black at the edges. She saw where his eyes went and pulled the coat closer, then caught herself and lifted her chin, daring him to flinch. He didn't. "Salva's in that blue tin," he said, turning a palm to the shelf near the stove. "Smells like sheep. Works just the same." She found it, opened it, and the room filled with the plain, fatty comfort of lanolin, She dabbed careful at a split along her lip, another on her knuckle, the half-moon on her shoulder. When her breath hit the sting, she didn't make a sound. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll roll by the stove." "I can take the floor," she answered quick. "Bed's warmer," he said, and left it there. "There's a spare blanket in the trunk. It's old Hank's wife's weaving. He says it wards off wolf dreams. Might be true, I ain't had one under it." Her mouth made a shape that might have turned into a smile if it had been safely fed for a month. "Wolf dreams been busy chasing me," she said. "Let 'em wear themselves out," he said. "They don't last forever." The wind dented the door once with a hollow hand, and went on down the draw. Lila shift again and looked at the fire like it was telling her the rules of this new small world in a language she halfway knew. The quiet had weight, but it wasn't the kind that pressed a person flat. It'd give to it like snow you can walk on if you spread your weight. After a while she said, "You didn't ask me nothing out there?" "No," he said. "Why? Cold eats answers," he said. "Better to feed a body first. The rest stands a chance after." She nodded at that truth. "I'll tell you," she said, and her eyes dropped to the cup, not the floor, which told him she still had some of herself left. "But I won't tell it all at once." She swallowed and put a hand on the coat where it crossed her chest. "I can't hold the whole of it without spilling." "You tell what you want and stop where you need," Silas said. "We'll sop the rest tomorrow." Her gaze touched his hands, scarred, clean, quiet, and moved on to the window where the frost had pulled back into ferny corners. "All right," she said, voice low as a winter creek. "After the fire dies down some." Silas reached with the poker and fed the stove a short, resonant stick, then set the poker aside like a settled argument. The iron breathed deeper. The law of the house had been said and heard. Outside, the wire sang. Inside, the shaking in Lila June's hands eased another notch, and the night, for the first time in a long while, looked like a thing a person might pass through and come out the other side. The fire leaned down to coals, and the room took on that soft, truthful dark where words come easier. Lila June sat forward, elbows on knees, cup held between them like a lantern she was afraid to set down. When she started, it wasn't a full stream, more a winter seep finding a crack. "Virgil Pike," she said, like spitting something that had soured in her mouth. "He took to cards after Mama died. Took to losing more. Folks in town quit extending grace. A man came up from Red Bluff and said he could tidy the ledger." Silas waited. The stove ticked, counting. "He wore a black neckerchief even indoors," she said. "Not fancy, work cloth, but tied tight like he was hiding his throat. Wrist had a scar like a child drew an X, red under the hair. He smiled with just the top teeth." She swallowed and lifted the cup. It trembled a little, then steadied against her lip. "Virgil said I'd fetch more than a brindled cow and wouldn't eat hay. Said a debt paid is a lesson learned." I locked the bedroom door and shoved the trunk. Window latch was soft with age. They came through easy. She didn't look at him. She looked at the wall past his shoulder, the place where the lamplight didn't reach. The man with the scarf laughed quiet, said I'd bolt like a deer, and that was fine by him. Said it made him feel young. He put his hand over my mouth like he was smothering a fire. Silas didn't touch the poker. He didn't move at all. "I bit," she said simply. "He bit back. He called me Weishelt." Virgil knocked once, then walked away. I waited till Scarf Man slept. I ran with no shoes, took the corn husks from the shed to cover what the wind would take. I meant for the river and missed it by a mile. The quiet settled, not accusing, not eager, just there with her. "You ask me his name," she said, finally dragging her eyes to his. "I heard men call him Mason Crow, like the bird that eats what's already hurt." Silas rolled that name once in his head and set it down where he kept other sharp things. "Crow," he said, like noting a star's place you might need later. She nodded, jaw tight. He had a notch in the heel of his boot, she added, surprising herself with the memory. Left foot. Hitched the print funny. I watched it fill with snow when he followed me to the gate. Wind worked along the eaves, a slow feathering. Silas rose, crossed to the door, and set the latch easy with 2 fingers, so the metal wouldn't clack. He eased it open a hand's width and let the night breathe on him, cold, clean, carrying far sounds. The wire's song had shifted since dusk, a higher tremor like a plucked string held by a new weight. He stepped out onto the step-boards. Snow reflected enough sky to make everything a pale kind of bright. The mare lifted her head in the lean-to but didn't stamp. He crouched and laid his palm near the sill where drifts scalloped. There, soft collapse of crystals in a shape not made by wind. 2 shapes, in fact. Older, blurred, newer, not yet skinned over. One with a heel scar that caught and tore a crescent into the crust. When he came back in, he shook the wet from his hand and closed the door without sound. Tracks in the draw, he said. 2 sets. One drags a heel. Lila's fingers closed white on the cup. She put it down careful as if it might crack. He found me? He looked, Silas said. Maybe looked and moved on. Snow will tell more at light. She worked a breath through herself and nodded. If he comes, I won't hide under the bed, she said, voice small but set. I'm done with that. You won't have to choose the floor or the bed tonight, he said. You'll choose sleep. That's enough choosing for one day. She almost smiled, then didn't. Her hand went to the bite mark at her shoulder and pressed the salve there. The sheep smell rose again, homely, clean. A soft scrape touched the far window, not knuckles. A twig tipped and lifted in a pattern a man could read if he had learned the language of this country. Silas set his palm up for quiet and crossed to the glass. The frost had pulled back to ferns at the edges. Through them he saw a narrow shape slip along the sage, like a shadow that belonged to itself. The twig tapped twice, paused, tapped once, old sign for 2 behind. He lifted 2 fingers from the sill in answer and heard nothing more, only the wind and the wire. Lila watched him return to the chair, eyes asking what her mouth didn't. Friend on the hill, he said, knows how to say things without waking the world. Friend got a name? Does, Silas said, settling. We'll borrow it when it's time. The coals settled, red to deeper red. Lila drew the coat up to her chin and let her head rest against the chair back. Her eyes slid half shut and held there, like a sentry trying sleep on the first night it's allowed. Silas watched the door, the window, the seam of light under each, and counted the stove's breaths. Not to pass the time, but to mark it, held. Outside, snow went on doing what snow does, covering tracks and saving them both for a while from the sight of what followed. Toward midnight, the wind laid down some, the way a tired horse quits arguing the bit. Lila June's chin had sunk into the wool collar, her eyes slivered, but watchful. Silas Boone laid another stick in the stove crosswise so it would burn slow, then sat where the chair's back let him see. Window, door, and the seam of light under both. You said he wore an X, she murmured, voice cotton dry. On his wrist, Silas said. She nodded. Her hand lifted from the coat and hovered near her mouth, not touching the split skin. I seen it plain. Looked fresh. He liked showing it. Silas breathed once. Slow, a man can feel a choice before he speaks it, the way a rider feels a horse lean toward water. He unbuttoned his cuff and turned his left forearm into the lamplight. Old skin, ropey, crossed by a pale scar made of 2 hills meeting in the middle. Time had rubbed it smooth as river glass, but the shape held. Lila straightened like a pulled string. Her eyes flicked to the door, the window, back to his hand. It's mine, he said. Not his. Her voice sharpened. Looks the same. It ought to, he said. We cut it ourselves. She went still as a deer that hasn't decided what the brush is hiding. Why would a man do that? Because Petersburg burned all the soft out of us, he answered. 65. We were 5 scouts long behind the lines and running dry. We took a vow none of us liked, but all of us trusted. If any one of us quit on the others or sold what he knew, the rest would carry the mark to remember. A brand a man puts on himself don't wash off as easy as shame. She stared at the place where the 2 lines crossed, as if the skin might speak. So it's not a club? It's a reminder, he said. A thing a man reads when there ain't paper. He rolled the cuff down, slow, buttoned it with his offhand. I never wore mine for show. Her jaw was tight enough to ache. He could see the thought running. 2 men, same sign. One hurt me, the other fed me beans. The world is crooked. How do you set it straight in your head? She swallowed and let her gaze lift from his wrist to his face, measuring. If you carved that to keep faith, she said, each word placed careful, how come the man that hurt me carries it too? Because Crow was there, Silas said, giving the name a flat place to sit. He was one of the 5 once. I had him for dead a long time. Looks. I was wrong. She let air out slow like she'd been holding it since the corn crib. So you know him. I used to know the man he was, Silas said. War changes men quick. Snow changes them too. Sometimes it brings the truth out faster. Her fingers came together in her lap till the knuckles blanched, then eased. You going to turn me over to him? No. You going to turn me over to the law? Law's already word, then wears different hats, he said. I'll talk to the one I trust. Who's that? Ruth Caldwell, he said. Sheriff at Red Bluff. Lila blinked. A woman sheriff? Best shot in 3 counties, and stubborn in all of 'em, he said. She keeps her ledger straight. I owe her and she owes me. That's cleaner than most prayers. The stove sighed, the iron glowed at the seams like a well-banked promise. Lila's shoulders unhooked a notch. And the friend on the hill? He'll ghost those tracks till light, Silas said. He don't speak more than he needs. Like you. He let that pass. Names were for daylight. She reached for the blue tin and dabbed the bite at her shoulder. The sheep smell walked the room, homely as a barn. Back there, she said, eyes on the salve. When you put the coat on me, you didn't look. I looked, he said. I just didn't take. Her breath hitched once, then steadied. It wasn't thanks, not yet, but it was a hinge, turning. You can use the bed, he said again, because people forget kindnesses they don't believe they deserve. I'll keep the fire. She hesitated, then rose. The coat swung heavy and warm around her shins. She crossed to the bed and touched the woven blanket with her fingertips. Like reading a map. Feels like it remembers folks, she said. It does, Silas said. Old Hank's Mattie put her winter into it. You lay under that, the night remembers you back. She lay down slow on her side, facing the stove, eyes still on him by habit. He set his hat crown down on the table, eased his back against the chair, and listened to the wind talk itself thin along the wire. Outside, snow shuffled off the eave with a soft thump. Somewhere far off, a coyote gave a single dry bark and thought better of it. In that quiet, Lila's breathing found the long stroke of real sleep, the kind that fishes a body back from under the ice. Silas waited till her breath had counted 20 steady, then slid his sleeve up again just enough to feel the seam of the old scar under his thumb. He pressed it like a man checking a fence post for rot. Still there, still holding, the latch lifted a hair. Not wind. Wind doesn't pinch wood like a careful thumb and 2 fingers do. Silas's head came up but didn't move otherwise. The stove threw a rectangle of red across the floorboards toward the door. In that light, the latch tipped once, settled, then lifted again, as if something outside was learning the weight of it. He reached without looking and set his hand near the rifle that leaned by the jamb. He didn't touch metal. He let his fingers rest on the stock where the wood knew him. From the bed came the small, unthinking sound a sleeping person makes and swallows. Lila didn't wake. The latch eased down, slow, quiet stacked on quiet. Then the porch board out front spoke with a soft, wet groan under a new weight. Silas's voice was barely more than breath. "Stay asleep if you can," he said. Not to her, but to the little piece they'd borrowed. The next sound would choose what the night became. The next sound was boots arguing with ice, and then a breath that smelled like rot gut shoved through the door's crack. "Boone!" A voice slurred soft, like a knife that wanted to be friendly. "You open up now." "I come for what's mine." Silas didn't answer. He let silence carry weight. The latch inched again. A shoulder thudded. The door held once, twice, then burst on the third try, snow powdering in around a man who'd forgot how to be cold. Virgil Pike lurched across the threshold with his belt half buckled and a grin that didn't ask permission. The grin faltered when his eyes found the stove light and the shape on the bed beyond it, the wool coat, the woven blanket, the hair loose on the pillow. "Well, I'll be," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand like a boy who'd stolen honey. "Didn't peg you for charity, Boone. You got my property dressed warm and tucked sweet." Silas stood without hurry. The rifle stayed where it was, leaning. He put himself between the door and the bed, his hat still on the table, his hands empty but squared to use. "You're standing in front of a stove," he said, voice desert dry. "Take one step back and close that door, or you and I will have words the wind won't bother to carry." Virgil laughed low. "She's a debt I intend to settle. Man from Red Bluff'll be along to claim his share. You're just keeping her from freezing on us. That's mighty helpful. We'll call it rent." From the bed came a rustle and the small sound of breath catching. Lila had woken to the stink of him before the words. Her hand slid to the blanket edge and gripped. Silas tipped his head a fraction, as if listening to a far train. What he heard was his blood deciding. "You'll step back," he said again, "or you'll leave on your face." Virgil set his boots and rolled his shoulders like a rooster. "Old man, you ain't—" The punch arrived before the insult completed itself. It came straight, short, and unannounced, driven from hips that knew post-hole work and winter wood, a line as clean as a pulled fence. It met Virgil's jaw square with a dry, wooden sound, thunked like a billet set true. Virgil's eyes went wide with the useless idea of changing the past. His knees chose collapse. He folded without style and struck the floorboards in a sideways spill, one boot still inside the drift of snow he'd dragged in. The room held the thud and then let it go. Silas shook the ache out of his knuckles once and reached down to check breath and pulse like a man checking stock in a bad year. Alive, sorry about it. He caught Virgil under the armpits and hauled him across the threshold, boots bumping the sill, head lolling. Outside, the porch boards complained. Silas rolled him face down into a bank where the wind had piled the night shoulder high. The snow took him with a muffled sigh. Cold is a quick teacher and a fair one. "Cool off," Silas said, not unkindly, and took Virgil's belt in one tug to keep him from thinking of walking before his jaw remembered how. He looped the leather through the porch rail and set the tongue back through the buckle with a neat click. Then he closed the door against the wind, and the man latched it and stood a moment with his palm on the wood, the way a rider seats a saddle. Lila was sitting up, the coat gathered, hair wild from the pillow. Color had drained from her lips and crept back in the same breath. She started, then couldn't finish. "He won't be charming for a spell," Silas said. He rinsed his bruised hand in the snow tracked onto the floor, hissed a little, and wiped it on his trouser seam. "You all right where you are?" She nodded. The nod turned to a shake, and then steadied to her. "The other one," she said, words thin. "The man with the scarf. He said he'd come after to count the money, and—" "I know his name," Silas said. "And his boots." He crossed to the lamp and turned the wick down a hair so the room hid more than it bragged. "If he's close, he's learning our door better than he ought. He'll do his figuring outside for now." They listened. Through the wall, Virgil began to moan, the moan of a man discovering winter again. The sound moved from bravado to complaint to quiet, then to a muffled curse he couldn't quite form. Snow was teaching him letters he'd forgot. Silas poured hot water into the wash basin and dropped in a thumb of lye. "You want to rinse that bite?" he asked, eyes on the rising steam. "Yes," she said, small, as if asking permission to exist. He set the basin on the trunk, laid out a clean square of toweling, then turned his back and studied the iron seams, while she bared the shoulder and worked. The salve smell walked up again and sat in the rafters with the smoke. "You hit him, like he said something about your mother," she said after a minute, voice steadier. "Didn't say anything about mine," Silas said. "Said enough about you." Her mouth tugged at a corner that might someday learn to smile with its whole self. "He's going to run his mouth to the law." "He'll run it to whoever buys his next bottle," Silas said. "Either way, it finds Sheriff Caldwell before noon." Lila's eyes flicked to the window where frost ferns held the corners. "You think she'll help us?" "She'll help the county," he said. "Tonight, that's the same thing." From outside came the wet snap of a leather tongue in a cold buckle. Virgil had found his pride and pulled at it. The belt held. He cussed soft and saved his strength for later. Silas slid the bar across the door, a simple length of pine cut to fit snug. The sound it made, seat, set, wasn't loud, but it was final as a decision. "Sleep if you can," he said to Lila. "We've got company waiting for morning." She lay back slow, face turned toward the stove and the man between her and the night. The woven blanket made a small burr sound as it rubbed her hair. Her eyes stayed open a while longer, then dropped in stages like a hawk circling down. The fire held, the wind thinned to a whisper that told the wire everything it needed, and on the porch, winter did its quiet work on a man who had thought himself hotter than the world. Dawn came blue and bone thin. The stove had held the room in the night, but the edges still bit. Window glass, iron latch, the rim of the basin gone cold. Lila June sat up slow, hair matted where sleep had pressed it, eyes reaching for the day before the rest of her did. On the porch, Virgil Pike made the small scraping sounds of a man who had learned to be polite to winter. He'd stopped boasting sometime near moonset. Now he only breathed and shifted, leather creaking, belt snugged to the rail. Silas Boone opened the door a hand's width. Steam rolled out, white on white. "You got two choices," he told Virgil. "You can go quiet when I cut you loose, or you can add another ache to what's already teaching you." Virgil's tongue worked behind a split lip. "Cut me then," he mumbled. "I'll go." Silas clipped the belt tongue free, let Virgil collect himself, and pointed him down the steps with a look, not a hand. Virgil shuffled off like a mule that had lost the argument anyway. He left a crooked trail toward the cottonwoods and the road. "Breakfast," Silas said to the room. Beans again, coffee thin, sourdough crisped in tallow. Lila ate steady, hands not shaking much at all. She kept glancing to the door as if it might sprout teeth. It didn't. It was wood. It stayed shut. They heard the riders before they saw them, two sets, pacing even, leather that had been oiled regular, the kind of horses that didn't pick fights with wind. Silas set his cup down and wiped his hands clean on a towel already clean. "Deputies," he said. Tom Avery and F. Klein, if I had to bet. Lila's breath shortened. He shook his head. Law's not a single man, he said. It's who wears it that counts. He moved the rifle to a corner where it could be seen and not reach for itself, then lifted the latch. Deputy Tom Avery was younger than his hat wanted him to be. His cheeks were winter-cracked and honest about it. F. Klein was old enough to remember 3 different flags over the same stretch of dirt. Both men had badges that had seen wind. "Mornin', Boone," F. said. His eyes went past Silas and registered heat, a second coffee cup, the settled shape of a person behind him. "We're looking for a girl. Word says you got one hid under that coat of yours." "Word came from a man named Virgil Pike," Silas said. "Likely as not he's cooling his jaw halfway to the river." Tom's mouth twitched. He tried to hide it with authority. "Ain't here to giggle, we got to look." Silas stepped onto the porch and pulled the door to behind him, leaving it a breath shy of closed. The cold took his face and tightened it. "Name Sheriff Caldwell and tell her Silas Boone's paid-up note says good morning. She'll make your next words cleaner." F's brows lifted. "Paid-up note? 15 winters ago," Silas said. "Ice on the powder broke under her, ropes snapped like fiddle strings. I hauled her out with a fence line and a prayer I don't much believe in. She told me there'd be a day I came to collect. This is the day Tom cut his eyes at Ephesians. Eve cut his back." The younger man chewed his cheek and then tried a different attack. "Boone, law says we lay eyes, or we write you down as obstructin'. Law also says you use the head God gave you," Silas said. "You got a tracker worth its salt. Ask him who walked up to my porch last night and left tied to it for a spell. Ask him who followed and where he set his heel wrong. Ask him what that says about the story you were sold." Snow squeaked as another shape came off the hill and slid into view, with the kind of quiet you don't buy in a store. Notsaw stood just beyond the steps, dark hair plaited, breath barely showing, eyes taking in what eyes took in long before mouths needed to. He lifted a hand, palm down, and etched a small crescent in the air with a forefinger. Saw it and nodded once. "Heel notch," he said to Tom. "Left side." Tom shifted in his saddle to look at the churned yard. "I see it," he said, grudging respect sneaking in. "Same as that crow we tossed for horse thievin' 5 years back." Silas didn't let his own surprise show. "Then you got a file you can dust." Tom's chin came up. "We still need to—" "You can come in if you say your names and your purpose and tip your hats to the woman by the stove," Silas said. "No rummagin'. No hands where they ain't asked for. You'll find a hurt person, not a prize hog." F took his hat off and ruffled what hair Winter hadn't trimmed. "Ma'am," he called past Silas, voice careful. "Name's F. Klein. This here's Tom Avery. We're just doing the part of the law that ain't stupid." Lila's voice came steady enough. "I hear you." They stepped in, hats low, boots clean of clinging snow. The heat lifted into their faces and softened the corners around their eyes. Tom saw the salve tin, the socks by the hearth, the plate with its beans dried to a brown lace. He saw the coat, the blanket, the way the room had arranged itself around a person who was learning to breathe different. Eve turned in a slow half circle, not prying, just letting his eyes tell him what needed telling. He looked at Silas. "You got the sheriff's telegraph line handy?" "Relay at Hank's," Silas said. 10 minutes at a trot. Tom set his jaw. "If she says haul you in, we haul you," he said, trying to keep the world simple. "I don't lie," Silas said. "I just bury the ones who do." Something in that landed. Tom stared at the scarred hands that had set beans and cut a man's feet out from under him without losing their calm. He looked at Lila and found a person, not a story. Uff flicked his glove against his thigh and headed for the door. "We'll ask her," he said. "Ain't our pride on the line if we do it right?" They left with a nod instead of a threat. The horses turned their breath to steam and set off down the draw toward Hank's. Hooves, making that hollow drum a winter trail, gives back. Silas slid the latch. Lila let air out slow. "You put your neck under their boot," she said. "Neck's been under worse," he said. He moved to the stove, fed it one short stick, and set the coffee back to the edge where it wouldn't boil out its sense. "Sheriff Caldwell will make the shape of this day proper. And if she don't, then the county gets smaller," he said, "and we ride to meet it where it's still true." Outside, Notsa stood as quiet as a fence post. That thought, he tipped 2 fingers toward the ridge and traced a line, 2 riders gone, 1 shadow staying. Silas answered with the smallest lift of his chin. "Get your boots," he said to Lila. "When they come back, we'll be ready to ride." By the time the light climbed the ridge, the deputies came back with frost in their mustaches and a telegram folded like a hard truth. Tom Avery didn't dismount. He read from the blue slip with his gloves still on. "Sheriff says Boone tells it straight. Bring the girl to Red Bluff if she's willing. Mind your manners. R.C." Eve Klein folded the paper neat and tucked it into his vest. "She means now." Silas looked to Lila. He didn't press. The question sent between them like a saddle waiting. Lila stood, pulled the borrowed coat close, and nodded once. "I'm willing." They moved quick without rush. Silas slung a canvas roll of blankets and jerky, checked the rifle sling, counted cartridges by feel. Lila worked her feet into the fur-lined boots he set by the door, winced, then gritted down. Notsa ghosted in from the sage and took the second lead rope without a word. He set a hand into Lila's stirrup as she mounted. The hand was careful as a midwife's. Old Hank met them at the relay with steam lying on his shoulders like a shawl. The telegraph clicked in the back room, tapping its little lies and truths down the wire toward places winter couldn't blank. Hank handed Silas a packet of cartridges and a small paper sack that smelled of mint and licorice. "Doc Harlan's cough drops," he said. "Good for everything that ain't a bullet." "Thanks," Silas said. Hank's eyes found Lila. He didn't stare. He lifted his hat and gave her the nod. "Men give another rider at a river crossing. Road's rutted hard," he told them. "Stay in the high marks and the creek will get out of your way." They cut south along the draw, keeping the sun over their left shoulders. The snow had a crust to it that broke with a sugar sound under the horses, and the cold made leather speak. Creak, sigh, creak. Lila rode stiff at first, then looser as the mare's heat climbed into her bones. Silas set the pace a notch under hurry, the kind of gait a body can carry all day and still have a little left at dark. At the mouth of Juniper Canyon, Nota slid off his pony and crouched by a scuffed patch where sage poked through. He tapped the edge of a print with a willow twig. The notch showed plain as a missing tooth, the left heel cut shallow and long. He drew a line forward with the twig and then 2 short slashes to either side, watchers flanking. "How many?" Silas asked. Notsa held up 3 fingers, then turned his hand and tucked one down. 2 with Crow, 1 split off. He touched the canyon wall and lifted his palm. "Sound travels, be smaller." They went single file where the basalt pushed in and turned the wind to a whistle through a keyhole. Snow fell soft, sneaking between the rocks and settling in the seams. A jackrabbit cut a perfect calligraphy across the drift and vanished into brush. Somewhere up toward the flat, a hawk talked to itself in 3 notes and was done. Doc Harlan's place sat half buried under a drift, door cut out of snow like a mine. He had a white beard gone yellow where coffee lived, and hands steady as a man that's always been paid in eggs. He looked Lila over without apology or impatience. then pointed at a chair by the stove. "Boots off," he said. "Let me see what Winter stole." She unwound the socks. He set a thumb soft into a purple bruise at the toe, listened to what the flesh told him, and eased back. "Cracks'll knit if you treat 'em like something you aim to keep," he said. He warmed lanolin with a breath and laid it gentle. "Bite marks clean." Whoever cleaned it knew what he was doing. He nodded at Silas. "Man can fix more than fence." "Fence don't talk back," Silas said. "Fence don't thank you either," Harlan answered, and tore a strip of soft cloth from a shirt sleeve that had already given some of itself to other troubles. He handed Lila a small tin. "Twice a day. Hide from the wind when you can. Sleep is medicine." Lila met his eyes. "Thank you," she said. The words held weight. They had not been cheapened. "Price is you come back when the baby kicks," Harlan said, like counting brands. Nobody blinked. He shrugged. "Don't make that face, Boone. I've been catching calves and kids since Grant was still thin." They left him with a nod and a promise to send Hank by with coffee. The sky had lowered while they were inside. Wind began to herd flakes sideways, small at first, then thick as sheep's wool. The world narrowed to the trail and the sound of horses working. Tom and F fell behind on purpose to break sign for anyone coming fast. Notsa kept drifting to the high edges, looking for the heel notch where Prince survived the gusts. "Cold's building," Silas said over his shoulder. "I can ride it," Lila answered, and meant it. They hit the benchland, and the wind came hard and honest. Snow found the crack between scarf and collar and made itself at home. Silas counted the rhythm of the mare under him and let it set the pace in his chest. "Steady, don't fix what ain't broke, save what you can." At a stand of pignon, Notsa cut right and dropped his hand low. He pointed with his chin. There, in the lee of a rock, a fire had been recently. Black coals under a sugar of new snow, a twist of rag half burned. He turned his palm up and spread his fingers. 4 men, or 3 and a mule. He tapped the heel notch again, then swung back into his saddle and never once looked behind him. "Crow's not far," Silas said. "I feel him," Lila said. "Face thin from cold, but sure, like a splinter that won't come out." "Sheriff'll pull it," Silas said. "Clean, quick." They saw Red Bluff near sundown, the bluff itself a red scar in the white. The town crouched at its base like a cow hunkered out of weather. Smoke braided up from a dozen stovepipes and blew sideways, then straight, then sideways again. The big sign over the sheriff's office had lost a letter to the storm, so it read, "Sherry F," and didn't seem to mind. Ruth Caldwell stepped out before they reached the hitch rail. She wore a buffalo coat with the hair still on and a hat that had seen rain from 5 directions in 1 minute. Her eyes were set steady under a brow that could lift or lower the temperature in a room quicker than a stove. "Boone," she said, no smile. The words themselves were their own handshake. Her gaze went to Lila, took measure, moved on to the deputies, then to Notsa, with whom she traded one nod that meant 50 small true things. "You brought weather," she told the sky, then looked back at Silas. "You brought trouble with a notch in its heel." "Crow," he said. "I figured that before I boiled the coffee," she said, and pushed the door wide. "Get her warm. Get your horses rubbed down, then tell it to me in order. No embroidery, no holes." Lila set her foot to the ground and swayed once. Caldwell's hand was under her elbow, quicker than talk. The touch was clean, steady, done the second it wasn't needed. "Ma'am," Lila said. "Ruth'll do," the sheriff answered. "We'll borrow each other's names till this is over." Inside, the office had heat, with a backbone, maps tacked to a wall, a ledger open to a page where the ink had just dried, a rifle rack with no dust on it. Caldwell poured coffee that could raise the dead to vote, and set a tin cup in Lila's hands. "Now," she said, meeting Silas's eyes, Tell me where he is or where he means to be. And don't leave out the part with the X. Ruth Caldwell listened the way a dry country drinks. Silas spoke plain, Lila filled in where words needed a woman's angle, and Notsa laid his palm to the map and tapped the places the snow still remembered. When they were done, Caldwell opened a bottom drawer and drew out a thin packet wrapped in oilcloth. She slid a paper free with 2 fingers. Mason Crow, she read. Horse thieving dismissed for lack of witness. Assault pled down to a fray, fine unpaid. Notation, walks with left heel hitch from split iron at Abilene. Her mouth worked around a thought that didn't need cussing. That notch is older than some lies. Tom Avery leaned in, curiosity beating out pride. F. Klein didn't step closer, he just saw it the same from where he stood. Caldwell put the paper flat with a rock on each corner, a habit from windier desks. All right, she said, we'll do this clean. I don't want echo. I don't want legend. I want a county that sleeps, she moved. 3 beans on the map. 1 for Silas, 1 for Lila, 1 for herself, then 2 for Tom and Eve, and a small round pebble Notsa fished from his pocket and set at the canyon mouth. Crow runs cold trails, she said, but he likes the left bank of Dry Fork. More cottonwoods to ride behind if the moon shows. He'll try for the Spanish Gate and the state line by first light. Virgil will limp along 2 hours behind, belly sore and jaw worse, thinking money fixes weather. She looked to Lila. You've done your part. You stay by this stove till someone I name says otherwise. Lila's mouth set like she might argue. Caldwell tipped her head. You got a borrowed coat and a baby to choose for. Let us do the lifting. Lila let the breath go. Yes, Ruth. Caldwell handed Tom the telegraph form. Send Hank. Close Spanish Gate for repairs. Stall a freighter crosswise if you have to. Put on the dumbest face you own and ask for signatures. She turned to Ephesians. You and Noetsa swing wide and quiet. Cut sign before Crow sees town. Put him where I want him. Where's that? Eve asked. Caldwell marked a finger-width gulch just north of the stockyards. Here. Dead ground to the wind. No backdrop for a shot, and no comfort for a boast. We'll make a little theater out of borrowed chores. They moved. The town had a way of taking a sheriff's job when it needed to. A freight sledge broke on cue across Maine, mules blowing and looking injured by the idea of work. 2 ranch hands with nothing to do suddenly had everything to do, and all of it, in the exact path a man would choose if he hated being looked at. The blacksmith stepped out to inspect a horseshoe that didn't need inspecting and let his hammer talk just enough to say, not today. Notsa went to ground the way river water finds low places. Eve drifted into shadow. Tom took the alley by the undertaker and made himself small enough to be a roomer. Caldwell walked like a woman heading to boil coffee somewhere else. Buffalo coat open, hat brim low. Silas fell in 2 paces back. Not her shadow, her weather. Snow came fine and thick, stealing edges and making sound carry short. When Crow slid out from under the cottonwoods just where she meant him to, he looked less like a legend and more like a tired man who had outrun his luck by a county. He had the black neckerchief. He had the heel notch. He had a face that had learned to smile without telling the eyes. Mornin', Caldwell said, like greeting an unwelcome chore. Mason Crow brought his horse down to an easy 4 beat and showed a set of teeth Winter hadn't bothered. Sheriff, he said, his eyes clicked past her, saw Silas, measured him move, and heard you run a tidy town. Tidy enough, I don't like your habit of dragging dirt across the floor, she said. Dismount. Now why would I? Because your cinch strap is mostly cut, she said, mild. If I shoot the tail free, you'll land in front of me like laundry, or you can step down like a man whose mother raised him civilized. His eyes flicked once to the cinch. Somewhere behind, beyond the reach of his seeing, Notsa's knife had done a quiet kindness to the morning. Crow slid out of the saddle like settling a bet. "Hands," Caldwell said. He showed them, palms out, a dancer giving proof of empty tricks. "Lawman to lawman," he said to Silas, mouth crooked. "You going to tell her I'm a guest?" "I'm going to tell her you're done," Silas said. Crow's eyes sparked, then flattened. "That's so?" Caldwell took a half step, buffalo hair brushing snow. "Mason Crow, you're trespassing on my patience. You can go to cell or to county line. I don't much care which road teaches you best. While you think on it, your partner comes up behind you with a jaw that ain't squared yet." As if named into existence, Virgil showed at the alley's far mouth, hat low, eyes 2 sick coins. He took in the sledge, the sheriff, the quiet men who weren't looking at him, and yet were, and he slumped into the sort of compliance that had saved small men since Cain. "What's it to be?" Caldwell asked Crow. "Bars and ledger, or the Spanish gate you ain't crossing again?" Crow weighed it. Men who live by the angle of odds do fast math. He saw no cover, no crowd to weaponize, no drunk deputy, no long speech to wriggle through. He saw winter and a woman who had seen worse than him and held her line. He glanced once at Silas, the old ex, living quiet under the man's cuff, and something like memory crossed his face and died of exposure. "County line," he said. "For now." "For good," Caldwell corrected. "You set foot here again. Our conversation changes language." She didn't shackle him. She didn't need to. She had the snow, the town, the distance to the gate clogged with Hank's best inconvenience. She took his gun, old habit, and handed it to F, who made it into a shape that would take some fixing. She let Crow keep his pride because men like him don't know how to walk without it. Pride makes them clumsy. They moved as a piece. Yif and Tom drifted to the edges. Notsa was wind at their backs. Silas kept to the near side where Crow's eye would catch him and decide against trying. Virgil clattered his excuses in a whisper. Nobody priced. At the Spanish gate, Hank had a freighter jackknifed perfect and a pencil behind his ear. "Sheriff," he said, honest pleased, "I got forms." "You got a hole big enough for trouble to fall through?" she asked. Hank considered the snow, the sledge, the mules, the geography of a day that wanted a simple finish. "I do," he said. Caldwell pointed with her chin. "You boys go through that hole and keep going till you find a county that likes your smell. If you come back across my dirt, you won't like what winter remembers." Crow studied the horizon like a man trying to decide if the world was worth it. Then he set his horse pointed south and didn't look back. Virgil hesitated long enough to try on a last shabby smirk at Silas and found no purchase. He followed Crow like a loose button follows a coat into spring, without much say in it. They went small in the falling snow, not gone, not forgiven, just not here. Caldwell stood a while, letting the cold write its sharpness across her cheeks. When the last of Crow's trail feathered into nothing, she turned to Silas. "Law didn't sing today," she said. "That's how I like it." He touched his hat brim. "You want a ledger note?" She shook her head, the buffalo hair swaying. "Some things I write down in other places." She reached into her coat, took out a narrow scrap of ribbon, and tied it once around the wrist of his glove, neat as a brand you can cut free of. Debt settled. Back in town, Lila sat with her boots off and the woven blanket over her knees, steam from the sheriff's coffee painting her face tender. When Ruth came in, she didn't announce victory. She shut the door behind the weather and shrugged out of the coat. "They're gone," she said. "The county's clean for one night longer." Lila held Ruth's eyes and then let them slip to Silas, just a breath. The tightness in her mouth let go. Not a smile, a rest. "Thank you," she said. "Thank me by eating and sleeping and staying warm," Caldwell said. and by choosing different names for your tomorrows. She looked at Silas like a woman looking at fence lines after a blow. Take her home. Keep your fire high. If the wind brings me anything with a left heel notch, I'll send it on past your door. Outside, the snow changed to a softer fall, big flakes that fattened the evening and hid hard edges. Red Bluff lit its lamps one by one. Somewhere a piano tried a hymn and forgot the middle. Notes left no mark except a small willow twig propped upright by Silas's stirrup. Sign for finished. They rode out under a sky the color of pewter. The world narrowed to the space between two horses and the breath of the one who rode behind them. Justice hadn't made a speech. It had just walked the street, steady boots, and kept moving. The ride home felt shorter, like the country had shifted a fence line while they were gone. Snow drifted lazy now, fat flakes spiraling without hurry. Lila June rode with her hands easy on the reins, the sheriff's coffee still working in her chest. Silas Boone kept the pace steady as chores. At the cabin, the stove woke quick, like a dog that knows its name. Silas fed it splits he'd stacked under the eave last fall and shook the ashpan with the same care he'd used checking a colt's leg. Heat moved into the room, slow and sure. Lila stood by the door and let winter pull itself off her one piece at a time. Hat, scarf, coat. When the steam finished ghosting off her hair, she drew in a breath that didn't rattle. They fell to the small work that makes big hurts quiet. Silas shaved curls of kindling onto a piece of newspaper, read a line of old headline without meaning to, then tucked flame under it. Lila rinsed the tin cups, dried them on her skirt, and lined them on the shelf with the utilitarian pride of a person deciding to stay. The blue salve tin took its spot like it belonged to the house now. He dug a packet from his coat and put it on the table. Soft leather boots lined with rabbit fur, the stitch small and close. Hank's wife's size, he said. Maddie kept them for a winter. That never got bad enough. He shrugged. Looks it did. Lila worked a hand along the seam and didn't hide the way her mouth softened. They're kind, she said, and slipped them on, toes searching and finding. Doc Harlan says rest, Silas told the floor, which seemed the safest thing to tell. Tea helps. What tea? He held up a twist of dried sage. Cow sage. Smells like a cold saddle pad. Puts the fight back where it belongs. He boiled water and let the leaves steep till the room tasted of open land after snow. Lila cupped the heat and drank in small, contented sips, like a person walking the fence line of something new. Hank clomped up toward dusk, his beard wearing frost, and his grin making its own heat. He stood just inside the door to shed cold, and then set a folded bundle on the bed. Maddie's winter weaving, he said. She told me to give it when it would do more than look pretty. That day finally showed Lila didn't reach right away. She looked the way a person does at a thing promised by someone they'll never meet. Then she set her fingers to the wool and pulled it open. The pattern held tiny diamonds, red and black, a patient geometry. She laid it over the foot of the bed and smoothed it twice, palm flat. Thank you, she managed. Hank ducked his head, embarrassed by gratitude. Coffee's on me next time, he said to Silas, then added to the room, you keep your chimney clean. Wind's turning come Wednesday. He left a paper sack of dried apples on the table and vanished into the blue light like a story ending where it ought. After he'd gone, the cabin took on the hush of a place learning its new center. Silas carried boards in from the lean-to and set them across but two trestles. He measured without talking, marked with a carpenter's pencil that had been chewed thin, and began to cut the rails for a crib. The little saw sang a steady, neighborly tune. Lila sat close enough to feel the rhythm in her chest and close her eyes to it. You built cradles before? She asked, not looking. Only for calves, he said. But a pen is a pen if it's made with care and holds more than it harms. He fit tenons to mortises, tapped them home with the heel of his hand, and whittled the corners to a round that would be friendly at 2 in the morning. He sanded until the grain lifted like water under wind. When he set the frame together dry, it stood square without argument. He took it apart again just to prove he could and put it back with pegs he'd turned smooth. "Where?" he asked. "By the stove," she said, then second-guessed herself. "No, by the window. No, you're right, by the stove." He slid it there and stood a moment measuring the distance from bed to heat to door to where a chair would go, in case of sitting late. Lila watched the geometry of his care and felt something inside her line up. Outside, the wire sang a softer note, wind downshifting. Notice's sign sat at the sill, a willow twig angled against the frame. Finished? Safe enough. Silas left it there. Lila liked the look of it. They ate beans and apples, and it tasted like a feast people choose instead of a meal the world throws. Silas talked a little about fence lines that drift in March and the way cattle learn the meanings of snow. Lila answered with a story about her mother's bread that could make a cabin smell like a church. The words weren't many. They didn't need to be. They made a bridge that didn't wobble. When the stove settled, he moved his bedroll nearer the door and pulled another stick from the woodbox just to have it ready. Then he took a small nail and a scrap of leather and fixed a latch on the inside of the bedroom door that could be worked from either side with a string. Lila saw it, and the look she gave him carried more thanks than talk could hold. "You fix everything," she said. "Most things," he said. "The rest you live with until it learns your name." She stood in the doorway, Maddie's blanket in her hands, and glanced toward the crib, then at him. The stove's light made copper out of the scars on his knuckles, something decided behind her eyes. She stepped closer, laid a palm on the rail he'd sanded, and then on the wool of his sleeve, quick as a sparrow. "I've got something hard to say," she told the quiet. "I'll say it right." He nodded. "All right." "Not now," she added, a small breath of a smile at herself. "After the fire goes down a notch, and the night's standing still." "Night stands still for honest talk," he said. She drew the blanket to her shoulders and looked around the room, like a person counting what will be hers to keep lit. The mare snorted in the lean-to. The wind combed nothing in particular. The crib waited by the stove with its rails smooth and its corners round. Lila touched it once more, as if checking the truth of it, then lifted her eyes to his. "Soon," she said. "Soon," he agreed, and gave the fire a short, sure stick, the kind that burns steady and quiet, while two people find the next words. Night settled easy, a felt hat pulled down against the last of the wind. The stove breathed like a steady old dog. Shadows from the crib laid narrow bars on the floor, harmless as fence lines in snow. Silas Boone sat in his chair with the poker across his knees, not using it, just holding a simple tool that knows its job. Lila June stood at the window a time, Maddie's blanket over her shoulders, watching snow lose interest in falling. When she turned, the room had that stillness folks trust for hard words. "It isn't yours," she said. The truth walked plain without makeup. Silas didn't flinch. He set the poker back gentle as if laying a child down. "All right." Her breath came and went once, deciding its pace. "I wish I could give you different," she said, "but wishing ain't a horse." "No, Shinhan," said, "but it keeps a man leaning in the right direction." She moved a step toward the stove, then another, until the heat found her shins and the scars along her hands looked like old rivers on a map. "Back there, when you gave me your coat and didn't take, something moved like spring under ice." She swallowed. "I don't know what to call it yet." "Don't need a name to start using it," he said. Her eyes found the crib and held. "Doc Harlan says sleep is medicine. I've been taking spoonfuls. The dreams don't bite as hard under this roof." She touched the rail with 2 fingers, then left them there. If you don't mind, I'd like to try staying. At least till the wind forgets me. Wind's got a short memory if a house is kept, he said. Stay. She blinked quick at that one word, then nodded. There's more, she added, because honesty likes company. I'll carry this child. I'll raise it gentle if I can. I won't lay what happened on your shoulders like a debt you didn't sign. Silas looked at his hands, scarred and plain, the kind that fit tools or fold quiet. I got room on these shoulders, he said. Not for debts. For work, wood to split, fences to keep honest. One more plate on the shelf, one more pair of boots by the door come winter. He paused, found her eyes. If you want the name, there's room for that too. She let out a sound that started toward a laugh and landed as breath. Boom? That's the one I've got, he said. It's sturdy. Wears well. She nodded, decisive now. Then we'll wear it. They didn't reach for each other. They didn't need to. He rose and took the kettle off the edge, so it wouldn't boil itself thin, and poured 2 cups of sage tea that tasted like clean ground and second chances. She sat on the bed's edge. He took the chair, angled so the stove warmed both their knees. For a while they only drank and listened to a house make small agreeable sounds. The tick of iron cooling, the whisper of draft, the far-off shuffle of the mare in the lean-to. Crow'll stay gone, she asked. Not fear, just inventory. Ruth tied that knot clean, he said. If he unties it, he'll find fewer choices next time. And Virgil? Men like him spend themselves, he said. He started early. She accepted that math. When the baby comes, she said, voice quieter than the stove, I don't want the first thing it hears to be a door banging. Then it won't, he said. We'll keep hinges greased. Silence settled again, not empty, furnished. Snow gave the roof a soft hand. Somewhere a plank sighed and relaxed into its nails. Lila's shoulders lowered the kind of inch that counts. After a while, Silas stood and brought the crib closer, just a handspan nearer the stove, the sort of move a man makes to show his mind without spooking the world. He set a folded square of old flannel inside, smoothed it once, then stepped back as if to say, there. Lila watched his hands do that small work and put her own over the rail, finger notched between the pegs he'd sanded. Feels like a church without preaching, she said. Good, he answered. Preaching's loud. She looked up. The room put a shine in her eyes that wasn't tears so much as thaw. Thank you, she said, not for the crib or the boots or the tea, but for the arrangement of it all in a way a person could live with. He tipped his head the closest he came to bowing. Fair'll do, he said again, and the words landed like a brand burned light and straight. They set the cups aside. He took his bedroll to the door and turned it where he could see latch and window both. She lay down, pulled Mattie's blanket to her chin, and found a piece of sleep that fit. When the fire dipped, he fed it the short stick he'd set ready, and the light climbed back up the stovepipe, steady as promise. Sometime deep, when even the wire gave up its song, the old scar on Silas's wrist itched, and then went still. It didn't feel like a cross-out anymore. It felt, if a man let himself think such things, like a plus, a sign that meant add, not subtract. He pressed it once with his thumb, not to check if it still held, but to remember that he did. Toward morning, snow quit entirely, leaving the world clean as a washed cup turned upside down to dry. The first light folded itself along the window sash. Lila stirred, hand straying to the flat of her belly, a small privet greeting. Silas eased the door open and looked out at his fence lines. Nothing had moved in the night except the weather, and even it had learned its manners. He stepped back inside, worked the latch quiet, and added one more split to the fire, not because it needed it, but because some things earn keeping warm. Sometimes the West heals without ceremony. A coat offered, a door latched soft, a crib pulled a handspan closer to the fire. Silas kept watch while the wind forgot their names, and Lila learned sleep that didn't bite. If a story like this settled you some, drop a simple 0 or 1 below to let me know you're here. Subscribe, partner. There's more trail ahead, more stoves to keep, and more quiet reckonings worth riding out together.